Welcome to our anniversary episode of the D League. Today, our 10th episode, so our first anniversary episode. Ta-da! So it's Bilal and me, Jan again, and today we are going to continue our tool talk, our tool weeks. And today we are going to talk about level design and map editors and the functionalities, or which map editors you actually have available when developing a game. So let's get started. For our listeners that don't know what a map editor is, or maybe if we have not touched any map editor, most games come with with their own map editor. So, for example, if you start the editor and you have a strategy game with, let's say, tanks, then you can create the terrain and you can place units. So you can say, yeah, heavy tank, and you place it on the map. And then you have stuff like triggers where you can set specific actions, or like cutscenes in the game. Mm-hmm. So, a map editor is pretty much, if you start a game, without the map editor, you would have nothing. You would have, kind of just the assets like the character models and maybe like you could shoot maybe your weapon, but if you have nothing to play with, then the game is kind of boring, right? Level design and map design is pretty much a very important topic when developing a game, because that's what you're actually playing. You're playing a level.
Yeah, that's what the world
is. 2 weeks ago, we talked about game engines, and so when you decide for a game engine, how much does it influence your choice for a map editor or a level editor?
So it does a lot by default, because if you think about it, most people, they'll jump into an engine and they'll use the default stuff until they might realize, oh no, it's not working how they want it to. So I think, so Unity has like a default terrain engine, which is not great. I wouldn't recommend using it. And so you might get locked into that if you go into Unity. And if you only have that as an option, then you'll probably start looking into the asset store for an engine to buy, or a terrain editor to buy. So it can really affect the decision a lot, because each engine will have a different terrain editor. But with that said, you can always use external programs that will, I guess, build a map or create a map that can be exported for any of the engines, or at least any of the modern engines. But the problem with that is that now you only have the option of those external programs. So if you wanted to use Unreal's terrain editor, you couldn't if you were using Unity, and vice versa. If you wanted to use a Unity asset as a map editor, then you couldn't anymore if you were using Unreal, unless they have some exporting feature, which oftentimes they don't. It can affect that a lot. So it's something to keep in mind, definitely, when you want to make a game. If it's terrain focused, then something like Unreal might be a better choice, because Unreal has a really robust built-in terrain engine, whereas Unity's is kind of bad, basically, for lack of a better term.
So it's pretty much, if you decide to use Unity, then you can only use tools that can export to the Unity engine, And well, when you use Unreal Engine, then you're kind of stuck with assets and so on that are created for Unreal Engine.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you said, that well, to me it sounds like you really have to make a choice even like before you start working on a game,
Yeah.
what you want to focus on or what's important to you as features um, when creating the game, or I mean when you are creating levels and maps. um, Maybe the Unreal Engine editor has more assets, and if you have no clue, then at least you can create a map that does not look the same every 5 meters or something like that.
Yep.
And but before we continue talking about further map editors, before you start using a map editor, I think something that's really important when doing level design or creating a map is creating a layout for a map.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, you have different tools. You can either go pen and paper, so not even using your computer. You just start sketching, like you say, okay, I have this square for a map, and now I draw the lines, for example, where if you want to create a strategy game, where is high ground, where is low ground, where is maybe water, where are the resources, um, the pathways, and so on. And else, of course, you can do it on a computer, and there you can pretty much use any image editing program. You could use Paint even if you want. If you say okay, it's just for drafting, and you'll create the map later in your map editor that you chose. Then I guess pretty simple image editing programs are fine as well.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe if you say okay, I want to um, like include colors, where's grass, where's like dirt, um, maybe some lighting stuff, then you would probably go for a more advanced image editing tools. We talked about uh, well image editing tools last week when we talked about textures.
Mm-hmm.
So if you need any suggestions for tools that might be useful when creating a draft for a map or a level, then listen to our to last week's podcast. That the texture section should be what you're looking for. And I would also like to give you some examples on of games where you can actually see how maps were kind of drafted. And for example, for first-person shooters, if you played the old Doom games, so Doom 1 and Doom 2, you could toggle a map in the game, and which would show the area that you already discovered. And there you can see that everything is made up of lines. So if you have a pathway, then you have one line on the left side and one line on the right side, and then you have your character. I think it was a triangle or an arrow in the middle. So pretty much the whole maps are set up like that, where you can see stairs or pathways as pretty much just grids. And that's also, if you open the Doom map editor, that's actually what the maps look like. So you have that grid as pretty much the basis of a Doom map. And another example would be Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, where you also have a map feature, which shows you the layout of the area as well. And it shows you like a square and or like the room, and how for example, if it has um, like a slope, or maybe there is a turn, then of course it shows on the map. And so you can say, okay, when you try to create a map, then you can create a draft like that, where you say, okay, player starts like in the south, and he starts in a big room, and then there are three doors, and so there's like a small room, and then there's like the small room would be like a storage, and then there is a floor um, that you can use to go to the next room, and some other locked room or something like that. So I think that's pretty much it. From my experience, it really helps to actually put in some time into a draft, because when you create a map or a level, then you need to, or it's really difficult to come up with a design just like you open the map editor and then, yeah, I'm gonna create something now. So to think of think up of something on the spot. And so when you have a draft, you say, okay, I have the layout set already. So now I just need to make it in the map editor, and I need to make it look good. And that way you can actually ensure that you are actually creating what you are looking for in the game. Yeah, so yeah, that's why you should actually take the time, draft properly, because the time you're investing in drafting, you will save, I think, more time doing that than just trying out things in the map editor.
Yeah.
So, Bilal, you talked about the Unity map editor, and you said it's bad. Do you have any experience why it's that bad, or can it be like improved by downloading assets or additional programs, or like add-ons or something?
Yeah. So I think the main reasons why the Unity's terrain editor isn't great are, for one, you don't really get stock assets that look good. You kind of have, I think, one example of, I guess, a few different things. You don't really have the ability to make something that looks great. And the terrain editor also has, and also I'm talking about just the Unity terrain editor. There isn't really a Unity map editor by default. There's only the terrain editor, and so the terrain editor lets you, like, morph how you would expect, like, terrain to go up and down and that kind of stuff. So, like, making mountains and water and everything. But when you put on things like foliage, it really starts to make it really starts to show a lack of control given to the editor. So when you're playing the game, you'll see, like, foliage disappear when it's out of your view range, and you can't really change that. They kind of just have to disappear because of field of view. And it's kind of a weird. I feel like it's more one of those features where they added it in and kind of neglected it, because people have kind of gotten by with better tools out there. So I mean, they'll probably revisit it at some point, but I don't think they have yet. So
Hmm.
so one thing is that foliage problem, and also the lack of assets. That so it kind of has to look a way that they made it, unless you want to put the time into making all of your own assets. Um,
Hmm.
and then there's also some issues with making characters interact with the terrain. It's not exactly there's no out of the box solution for making your characters kind of follow the terrain's collider. If you move a character, it'll kind of have a lot of issues. So there's a lot of configuration to be done there. And I don't think I've ever gotten it to work properly because I just moved on to a different solution. Um, so so for terrain, I just would not recommend using Unity's default. If you're going to use Unity and you
Okay.
want to make something like Rust is a Unity game and it has huge terrain, they definitely did not use the Unity's built-in terrain editor because it just wouldn't be able to um, make that kind of solution. If you wanted to make something like Rust, then you definitely would look for other options, um, like I think I looked through the asset store briefly. I think the best thing that wasn't procedural generation and it was physically making the map was Terrain Composer 2. It's kind of like a node-based terrain engine where you I guess you can make terrain look how you want to with more settings than just I think how do I explain that? You know how all the basic terrain tools like raising terrain and lowering terrain and erosion and stuff like
Yes.
that. It's like it has that I think, and then other like extensions on it. Like I haven't looked too much into it, but a node-based extension that lets you do more than just that. So yeah, Terrain Composer 2 is one of the options, which is a Unity asset. It's about $45. And if you so that's terrain. If you want to talk about like map making, like with moving around objects and like stretching them and stuff like that, kind of like you would in a 3D modeler. Um, if you're making maps that aren't really terrain based, then I think Pro Builder is a really good option because um, it acts in a way that I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it, but I guess basically it lets you stretch objects in a uniform way, so you can extrude,
Hmm.
scale, move around, and all that stuff you would expect out of a 3D editor. But it lets you do it in a uniform way that doesn't ruin the art or like distort things. Um, Especially if you have the Pro Grids extension, it'll snap everything to a grid, so it'll work like a map editor would be built into Unity if you get that
Okay.
asset. So that's kind of a plus for Pro Builder. Um, and it has a free version. It would be really good for games like I'm trying to think of the names of the games. I think a game like Bastion would be pretty good for like using Pro Builder. And Pro Builder does have a lot of indie games that are pretty popular on their list of stuff that's made with it. So yeah, if you're not looking to make terrain and you're making more simplistic levels where you can move around objects, then Pro Builder is a pretty good option. And even if you are making terrain in the future, Pro Builder is pretty great for prototyping as well. So just making a primitive level as a concept so you can test out the game with characters moving around. Because, like you said, if you don't have a
Hmm.
map in the first place, then it's all you have is like the ability to edit a character or program, and like yeah, it's not really a game yet if you don't have a world to interact with.
Yeah,
So yeah,
exactly.
that's my
Also,
thoughts on
yeah, sorry.
Unity. I was just saying that's my thoughts
Uh,
on Unity.
yeah, I think, or for me, uh, I'm a big fan of tile-based map editors.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just like raising or lowering ground as, for example, you click in the center, and then it kind of creates a hole, or like if you have a mountain, then of course you have a peak. So it just stretches like the ground higher I find that really annoying. Or I think it's fine if you have a game that is nature based, like real,
Yeah.
like a, let's say, a jungle, or some, let's say, lone island with a mountain in the middle or something. Then it's fine because it looks well more natural. But um, for example, if you have an interior level, for example, you're in a factory or maybe some spaceship, or uh, yeah, some, like, if you play old RTS games, sci-fi games, they are on space stations and
Hmm.
on different planets and so on, and you um, then you want to just use tile-based stuff, because if you take, for example, a house, you don't have a house that the walls have different heights uh, every few centimeters, so it looks kind of like a wave shape or something that just looks, well, because it's artificial. You want to have it be even, right?
Yeah.
And I also think that tile-based editors are more easier to get into, because you just click, or for example, in Pro Builder, you, like you said, you just stretch things to the size you want, and then you move them, and then you place them, and then okay, uh, maybe you put some texture on it, and then yeah, that's it. And you don't have to look, yes, everything even, uh, is there maybe some corner where for example, if you have a first person shooter where people might actually be able to glitch through the ground and
Hmm.
and maybe die or something like that. uh, I guess it's also a big risk for debugging if everything is kind of uneven terrain.
Yeah, it makes it a lot
So
easier to edit when it's tile based, or even obviously even better prefab based, because if you can
yeah,
have tiles that already look a certain way, then the player is going to be able to just make their draft, and then the draft will be exactly the same as the map, because you're just putting down the objects in the right places rather than like pulling
exactly.
and moving around terrain. So I mean, yeah, I'm also more into the tile based map editors. I think the terrain editors are mostly good for I think games that are less that require less of a deterministic outcome. It's like I think so. A first-person shooter where you need to go through a detailed environment obviously would make a lot more sense to make or to use a kind of height map terrain editor rather than something like an RTS like we're talking about. Like StarCraft obviously is a tile-based one because StarCraft is a I mean, it's kind of a 2D game. It's like a deterministic game where you have units go into tiles and buildings go on the grid. So, um, so it's a lot nicer and easier to make maps with their tile editor. Like if StarCraft was using a terrain editor, it'd be really difficult to get everything to look the same as all the other maps. And players would have the opportunities to make really weird maps, and that would kind of ruin the, I guess, how the game works. It would ruin a lot of things with the game, actually. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Then you would have problems like when are units on high ground, or
Hmm.
I guess you would have like little bugs like that,
Yeah.
where the engine just doesn't kind of know what to do with your units.
Hmm.
And I think also an important part about tile based editors is that if it's easier for you as the developer to create a map, uh, if you played a lot of video games, then you know that many games come with their own map editor or level editor.
Hmm.
And so as a user, you can create maps, and that's also a selling point for your game. I mean, as a developer, you don't want to pump out maps or levels every few weeks so people keep playing and have something new to try out. So you just give the players the ability to actually create their own maps, their own levels. Um, so by making it easier for the player, or well, let's say by making it easier for everyone to use the tool to create own levels or maps, you also will um, raise the chance that more players will create additional content for you, and you don't have to invest time into it.
Yeah.
Guess that's pretty much what keeps old games like StarCraft or even StarCraft 2 or I know some people actually even still play the Doom, the first Doom games with custom enemies and custom levels and custom soundtracks and everything, because the game just came with the ability for the player to create everything on their own and implement it in the game. So by keeping it open, you also increase the replay value for everyone.
Yeah, I think yeah, in a lot of the RTS games that are still like played, like Supreme Commander is I don't know how old at this point, pretty old now, like 8 years. And the most played maps are custom maps now. There's like I think the biggest maps were Fields of Isis and Satan's Clutch, which were they're not community maps, they're original maps, and those have been the biggest maps in the vanilla game. But then when Forge Alliance Forever came around and they started editing, a lot of people like started using their own maps, and so like the most popular ones now are. Yeah, I don't even remember their names. There's like Dual Gap and one other one that's super. Oh yeah, Gap of Rohan, which is funny because that's actually from a different game. It's a mod, and so like those two maps are like the really popular ones now, which is interesting because they were made by community members. So yeah.
Yeah, the problem as a developer, you have an idea of how you want the game to be played, but in the end, well, you don't have the time to test out everything. So you also need to rely on the community to fix things on their own. For example, you can have a game with bad or let's say imbalances in the game, but you can kind of fix it by creating maps in a specific way. And when you release a game, you don't know how balanced the game is, I think. So it's always good to give the possibility to actually just fix it on your own, or so players can test out things for you and say, "Oh, yeah, that works really well," or "Yeah, that unit is overpowered, so they make it weaker," and then you can just copy the stats if it works out.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as the developer, your role is kind of like to make the limiting features. So everything that you build in the game is what the players are limited to extending. So, so yeah. I mean, you don't choose how a player plays, but you choose the ways that they can play, and sometimes indirectly. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I guess that's also something that has to do with programming, like how you, what features you include in the game. So how many options the player has. But yeah, by
Yep.
giving the tool, like the map editing tool, um, for example, you could say, uh, um, for example, if you take the StarCraft Brood War or Warcraft 3 map editor, they have a trigger feature. So you can set after 1 minute spawn these units or give player that many resources and so on. So if you would cut a feature like that from a map editor, then people would only be able to create really basic maps that what you start and you play normally that don't have any special features. And I think that's also something that you should keep in mind. How easy is it for people to maybe also go away from the standard map um, and create something special? For example, you have a lot of game genre that actually originated from Warcraft 3 fun maps. For example, tower defense or well, MOBA in general, hero arenas. So yeah, just having the possibility to create something like that, it makes people actually buy your game, and maybe just for the map editor even.
Mm.
And yeah, also you can it also adds replay value, because at some point people might get tired of just playing the regular game and they want something new, or they just want to relax. And then um, instead of having the player switch to a different game to have a different experience, um, if you have the feature to well, add triggers where people can pretty much do everything, like spawn units, go to point A and kill those units, or give that many resources if player does something special. Then you can also have, for example, an RPG map in a strategy game. And that way, well, you're still playing a strategy game, but it's also a role-playing game at the same time. So it's a different feel for the player, or a different game experience.
Yeah.
I don't have that much experience in Unity, in the Unity editor, or the Unreal Engine editor. But I mean, if for example, in Unreal Engine, if you take a look at the games that are based on Unreal Engine, then it should be no problem for you to do whatever you want with the game. And it's pretty much what you ship the game with as, for example, assets for the player to use. The more stuff you include, the better. Of course, it needs to be good quality, high quality. It needs to fit your game.
Yeah.
So that even if a player uses your editor, it keeps in line with the game. It would be kind of strange, for example, if you have let's say a lone a, like a survivor role-playing game on an island, and then you have as an asset a car, or maybe a lamppost, or maybe a power plant or something like that
Yeah.
that doesn't fit the setting. So yeah, if you include stuff that doesn't fit the setting, of course a player could build something that fits the assets, but there's a high risk that players will use it in a bad way. And then when somebody plays a custom map and it's all over the place, then it's probably a huge turnoff for the player.
Yeah.
Because it just there's no real design in the map. No, what is it, like a
I guess like theme.
red line? Yeah, like a theme in the
I
map
guess like
editing.
I guess like if you think about it, like Dota 2 or Dota 1 actually was made with like unfitting assets. I mean, like Venomancer is a Hydralisk, right? I mean, did they had 3D StarCraft assets in Warcraft 3, or did something happen there?
Yeah, it's built in the game. So the game actually came with a few StarCraft units. So like the Hydralisk or the Space Marine or the Space Orc with the flamethrower, those are actually units built into the map editor.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it doesn't really fit the setting when you have like troll warlords throwing axes, and then there's a space marine that shoots a laser gun or something.
Yeah, MOBAs
But
tend to do that.
in the end, it worked out, I guess, because
Yeah.
like you don't have those units in the main game, but for example, you had fun maps with the space marine based on the what is it? What movie was it? Um, I forgot, where you have these space marines fighting against alien ants, for
Oh
example,
yeah,
like these bugs. They call them bugs in the movie.
yeah,
Starship Troopers.
yeah,
The
yeah. That was
Starship
it. That
Troopers.
was it.
Yeah, so you have a game based on Starship Troopers. So they use the Space Marine and the Hydralisk, and I think there were even Zerglings in the Warcraft 3 map editor. So they used that for the bugs, and
Mm,
you had Space Marines as Terran Space Marines, like in
mhm.
the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it doesn't directly fit the fantasy setting of Warcraft 3, but I guess it's also a feature of the map editor that you can create. They included assets, more assets than needed, kind of, but
Yeah.
for everything. So for not only for units, but also for the ground and for doodads. So, for example, the rock would be a doodad because it blocks the path, but you cannot interact with it
Yeah.
in the game. It just, well, it's a rock blocking a path, kind of. Um, but they have had stuff for everything, so you could just say, okay, I'm going to use the map editor to create something completely different from orcs and night elf uh, themed game.
Yeah. I think I think when a map editor has the I guess lets you import your own assets. It's a pretty good feature of it. But it can get weird if the person is not experienced with it.
Yeah, I think in that case you also need to pay attention to the file size. I um, Do you know if Unity maps include everything in the map file, like all the textures and
Yeah,
like
the thing is, Unity doesn't really have it doesn't have a distinct like map file. It has prefabs and it has scenes, which are both, I guess, the closest things to map files, because a scene literally has everything inside of I guess one file. So when you open a scene, it's like configured game objects in a certain place, which can be like both the characters and the map and objects and everything. Um, and the map is probably just going to be a prefab, which is like I guess the base maps mesh and whatever else is there. So so I mean it can kind of have whatever. I mean what was the question again?
if if the files include everything like textures. So, for example, um, if you create the game in Unity and then somebody creates a map with imported textures, if if uh, if you send the map through the game, so somebody's downloading the map from that user, if like if adding custom textures and maybe even custom 3D models would increase the map size, or if you would need to download it kind of separately.
Yeah, I think if you were adding in custom things, then um, they wouldn't technically be a part of the map's prefab, but I guess you could probably make your own map configuration file of sorts. I think how it would work is that I mean, obviously it works however it's made. So that kind of thing that you're describing is probably something that a developer would make on their own. Because Unity doesn't really have. Yeah, I don't think Unity really has an easy way of importing new stuff into it. But obviously you could access textures that are near the game, like by path. Um, so if you made a custom map and you hit save, then maybe it would save some JSON or XML file that would refer to textures and like their positions and everything. Uh, and then that way the game would know, I guess, how to load them up. But yeah, I mean, whenever you add custom files into it, obviously, I guess it would increase the map. Well, yeah, it wouldn't increase the map file size, but it would increase, I guess, the file size of the game. So, I don't know.
Okay. Okay, I see. Um, mhm. What else could we talk about? Is there any other map editor you would like to talk about? We talked about Unity, a bit about the Unreal Engine editor. Is there anything else you would like to, well, talk
Yeah.
about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could briefly go over both procedural generation and 2D, maybe. So, like, I mean, you probably wouldn't use procedural generation in any sort of like competitive like game, but for like an FPS or an RPG, typically an RPG is like what procedural generation is used for, I think, or
Hmm.
survival. So I think, yeah, like actually, I think Rust has a level of procedural generation in it. So anyway, but
What would be? Yeah, sorry.
yeah, I was just gonna say, I think, yes. So yeah, Rust was the level of it, and yeah, typically a lot of the survival and RPG games will have it. So if you want to generate like either like space or jungle or any sort of nature, those are all common things.
Hmm.
And I know that Unity has two popular engines for it, and one of them was called Gaia, I believe. It was like a terrain generator, which is one that I looked at, and it looked really good actually. Excuse me. It'll generate like foliage and everything, and actually make pretty cool looking visuals. Um, and there's always the option of making your own sort of procedural generation, which is pretty difficult. But you can use things like Perlin noise and stuff like that to generate height maps. I know that I did a basic form of procedural generation in like a space environment before, so it would have a kind of zone system where asteroids would spawn, uh, I guess, in randomized areas in fields. So I guess you can kind of make your own simplistic procedural generation as well. Sorry, I guess. What were you gonna say about Rust originally?
No, I just wanted to ask you to kind of give a bit of an explanation what procedural creation actually means. I mean, we probably we both know what it is,
Yeah.
but for somebody that might have played the game that actually used it didn't even realize that the game used it. So could you explain it quickly?
Yeah, so I think procedural generation is what most people refer to as random generation. And it's basically, I mean, procedural as a word just typically in programming typically means that it's something that is determined like at runtime. So when you play a game and like you'll hit generate map like in Terraria or Minecraft, um, and you hit like new game, it'll generate a map, and that's procedural generation because it's determining what the map's going to be like during the game. Um, so typically anything like that, like even just spawning random, I guess power ups is kind of a procedural level of procedural generation. So it's kind of varying levels of stuff changing at runtime, and so that's yeah, I guess what I was describing with the terrain generators. Like as you're running the terrain generator, you'll hit generate, and then it'll make a terrain. And so while it's not maybe that's not during the game, but it'll procedurally I guess determine like what the map is going to be like as you're running this map editor, rather than you manually moving things around. So so yeah, like I said, I think in Unity Gaia was one of the options. I don't know of any for Unreal. I haven't looked at the assets much, but I don't think they have a built-in one. That would be interesting, actually. But yeah, um, so those are some options. Yeah, Gaia is one option, and making your own suite is an option. um, but yeah, I think for the most part, developers will have to employ a procedural generation system to get it exactly how they want it to be, because it's not really, it's not like there's no like plug and play solution. Like procedural generation, you want it to get your like you want to get it exactly right so that the level design is good even if it's generated. So yeah, I think that's kind of everything I had to say about it.
Okay, and the other point you wanted to talk about was 2D map creation.
Yeah.
So what? Yeah, go ahead. Just just
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I'm thinking.
Let's talk about it.
I guess to start, it's kind of simple because you only have like 2 dimensions to worry about. So even if you don't have a solution, you can kind of just drag and drop sprites that you made. And I mean, typically a lot of developers will have a system where like they'll already develop multiple tiles that can stick together. So like maybe a ramp tile and then a base ground tile, that kind of stuff. And so you can technically just like drag them around in Unity, but that's kind of stupid because you can. I mean, there are other map editors that will do that kind of thing for you, or like some sort of grid system that'll let you do that. Um, I know, yeah, like I said with Pro Builder, there's an asset called Pro Grids, which is a part of from the same kind of family of Pro Builder, which like lets you drag things, but they'll snap to a grid fixed point system. So you could even just use something like Pro Grids, and drag around sprites that are supposed to like link together. Or you could use like an external editor, like tiled map editor is one where you can just change what the tiles are. And it's pretty easy. Like you just put in textures or sprites, and then like drag and drop them, and I think it'll build a texture atlas so that it'll be like an efficient sort of map, and you can just import that into Unity, and like build an edge collider to make your characters like run on top of the terrain rather than like fall through it or have to generate a mesh collider. So yeah, tiled is an option. I'd say ProGrids is an option, even though it's like you wouldn't expect it to be used for 2D map generation. You can just because you can drag around the sprites. And I'm sure there are a lot of other solutions out there. I think for 2D generation, you could probably find a lot of assets for it pretty easily. It's not too difficult a concept, I think, for you to have to worry about like getting it exactly right, because either way, it just needs to be assets on a grid in 2D, so
Yeah.
on like X and Y. So yeah, I
I
think that.
guess in that case, it's more about creating your own assets,
Hmm.
because in a 2D game, the look must fit even more uh, together. I think, like uh, even for example, if you have tiles, then like the tile art style or like um, the the tiles are pretty much not just the ground, but also like the background, right? Because
Yeah.
you will have walls like tiles that actually are walls, so somebody cannot move through them. And in that case, both like the character design and the design of the assets for map building must have um, kind of the same art style.
Hmm.
Just imagine um, you draw the characters with oil, like an oil paint, uh, and then the tiles for the map are actually 8-bit, like really big, uh, blocky, um, low
Pencils.
detail
Yeah.
uh, assets. Then yeah, it just clashes with each other, and then you say, okay, it looks like you just copy pasted something together. So there's it disturbs the immersion of the player uh, in the game,
Hmm. Yeah, I think, and
or at
also
least that's
there's
my
also like.
experience with bad games.
Yeah, yeah. There's also uh, with 3D, because you said like with 2D it's even more important. Like 3D also has, it's not just like the models. There's also the shading and lighting and everything. So that's why it might be even more difficult for 2D, or it's even more important for 2D to look the same, because the art is like the creation of the sprite literally is everything, including like the shading and lighting and all that. So
Mm.
so yeah, that's why it's, if lighting on one of the sprites is different from the others, then it'll be really distinct, um, and you'll see it just look like it doesn't fit. Whereas with 3D, you can mess up, like it can be a little bit different polygon. It can be a little bit
Mm.
more like lower poly count or higher poly count, and you'll still be able to see like a similar art style, because yeah, it's not just the faces; it's also the.
Lighting and
Yep.
shader textures. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to see how sprites and backgrounds can actually collide, then maybe our listeners should take a look at Mugen, which is a kind of a 2D fighting game engine where you can import or create your own characters for.
Hmm.
So in that game, you can have like Street Fighter 2, Ryu fighting against Mortal Kombat Scorpion on like let's say a Pac-Man background or something like that. So in
Hmm.
that case, well, you can do everything, but there's a high risk of it clashing because the art styles are so different.
Yeah.
So it's very much just you can do whatever, but I think with Mugen there is pretty much like no kind of custom game with set characters and backgrounds that is actually really good. So
Yeah.
even though you have an engine, like nobody was able to make it look good in the end. At least that's my impression of it.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see why that happened. I think it would still be fun though, right?
Yeah, it's fun to just mess around because you have those like dream matchups where you say, "Oh yeah, I want to see Scorpion against maybe Superman or something like that."
Yeah.
You can play that in the game, or you have stuff like Tom Hanks as a character, as a fighting game character, or Omega Tiger Woods. So those are, of course, joke characters, but it's just to give you a laugh.
Yeah.
Also, they are really broken, and you cannot hurt. I think Omega Tom Hanks. I think he's completely invincible, so there's nothing you can do.
Well, that's great. Okay, yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's everything
So,
on 2D.
Yeah. So, anything else you want to talk about then? Because we talked about 3D, we talked about 2D, we talked a bit about tools that you can use for the engine of your choice. I guess, as we already mentioned in the beginning, you're probably limited to specific tools because not every tool can be used for every engine. Is there anything else you actually want to mention?
No, I think that's everything for the most part. Yeah.
Just one thing in at the end, because we always mentioned it previously. For the popular game engines and map editors or level editors, you also have tutorials to look up, so you can get an impression of how it is to work with a map editor or a level editor.
Mm-hmm.
And the features. So especially if you say, okay, I want to create a map in Unity, then like Bilal said, maybe the editor is not as capable as you want it to be, or maybe doesn't have the features you want to have. Then you will probably look for a different editor to use. And in that case, I think just taking a look at tutorials for the programs that are offered for example, Unity, would give you already a good impression of what can be done with the editor and like the what interface you can expect and how it works. And then afterwards you like the Pro Builder Pro, like the paid version, of course, costs money, and then you might be more reluctant to spend money.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take a look at like feature videos and tutorials, then you know, okay, this editor actually has all the features that I need or want to create maps or levels for my game.
Mm-hmm.
And then spending $40 instead of spending 1 week more to actually get a level to look good is a good investment, I think.
Yeah.
In the end, you're more limited by time than money. And they say time is money. So keep in mind that maybe assets or tools can actually save you more money than just the investment, the financial investment in the program. I mean, if you save $100 by using Pro Builder just from work time alone, then $40 is a good investment because you still saved $60.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I mean, there's always there are oftentimes like free versions. I'm not sure the differences between the free Pro Builder and the Pro Builder. Um, but obviously, I mean, like, you can just start with the free one, um, and if you need a feature that the Pro one has, then just go for the Pro one. But yeah, I mean, you would just want to lay out the features beforehand, because if the free one can't do what you're looking for and you're not going to buy the Pro one, then maybe you want to look for a different asset that's either cheaper or free or something like that. So, so yeah, I mean, just always plan and try out free stuff, and then see if you can make the kind of maps that you want to make with them, and then go for it. And if you want to increase the workflow, then I would say go for the pro versions.
Exactly. All right. So that concludes our podcast for this week, our 10th episode. Congratulations, Bilal. 10 weeks. Good job. You did it.
Woo!
we
Thank you,
we
sir.
we didn't stop.
Yeah.
That's something good, I think. So anyway, thank you for listening, and we'll definitely be back next week for another podcast, and then we will probably still keep talking about tools. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and then get excited for what we are going to talk about next week.